Hey.
Alright, y'all, as we know, the draft lottery is happening later tonight, and while I've never been the biggest draft guy or gone way too deep into scouting a bunch of players, when someone like a Victor Wembanyama comes along, it's kind of hard to avoid talking about him in the NBA world, especially once draft lottery night and draft night eventually comes around. So with that being said, I just want to make a quick tier list going through all of the potential teams that have a chance at landing the number one spot, and I will be ranking them with some basketball analysis, but at the same time, it'll probably mostly just be vibes and how I'm feeling about each and every team and what they would look like in adding Victor Wembanyama. So getting right into it, I guess we'll just start from the top. The Detroit Pistons are one of three teams with a 14% chance at landing Wembanyama, and they have Cade Cunningham, they've got Jalen Duren, Bojan Bogdanovic is a solid vet. They've got a good supporting cast that could surround Wembanyama early in his career. I know they're trying to rock the double bigs with Wiseman, Duren, and Marvin Bagley last year, and while that's probably not the best fit for Wembanyama, even though he'll probably rise to the top of that rotation, I'm going to throw them in the extremely fun just because Cade Cunningham has looked very promising in his young career. The Pistons, even though they finished with the worst record, have a lot of talent on the roster. I know Cade was obviously injured for most of last season, so getting Victor Wembanyama would definitely be a very fun addition to that roster. Next up is the Houston Rockets, and the Rockets are a mess right now as an organization. I feel comfortable admitting that. They have a lot of young talent: Jalen Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Jabari Smith, Alpi Sengun. The fit, talent-wise and timeline-wise, would be great, but now they have Ime Udoka added to the coaching staff as the new head coach, and I don't know, the Rockets, they're kind of a mess right now. I'm going to go as an U, just because unless they do make that James Harden addition, I just don't really see them being a competitive team next year, even with adding Wembanyama. And me personally, I'm trying to see Victor compete from day one. Next up is the San Antonio Spurs, and this might, it's probably going to sound very hypocritical just because I went off about how the Rockets are not ready to win, but I'm going to throw them in the cool. I think out of the realistic options, this is probably where I'd want to see Wembanyama land the most, just because I think Coach Popovich would be a great first coach for him to get acclimated to the league, coming over from the European side of things. They have Keldon Johnson, who's a bucket getter, Devin Vassell, bucket getter. Sohan was a cool rookie last year. Malachi Branham, Trey Jones, who was the big man? Zach Collins. They're all very solid players, and I would be very interested to see Wembanyama go into that very, I'm going to say nostalgic. I don't know where nostalgia came from, but that very history-centered San Antonio franchise. I think it'd be very interesting. Next up, we have the Charlotte Hornets, and I'm going to be honest, that might be the first redo. Hornets just don't have a lot going for them. Don't get me wrong, the fit with LaMelo Ball would be very cool. I'm just not sure if that would be the best big little duo in the league. I just feel like LaMelo could probably be paired with someone a bit more that suits him rather than Wembanyama. Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that duo wouldn't work. I'm just saying there are other duos that I'd rather see. But sort of like the Rockets, the Hornets just don't really have a great game plan for their future right now. And as I mentioned with Houston, I'm trying to see Wembanyama compete from day one, whether that if that means just being a play-in team. And with this current Hornets roster, I think it'll probably take more than a couple years for them to actually build a foundation for Wembanyama to play around. Next up is the Portland Trailblazers, and I'm going to throw that one in the extremely fun because you have a superstar player like Damian Lillard, and you have Anthony Simons, Shaedon Sharpe, both showed great potential last season, and specifically at the end of last season. You have other solid role players like Yusuf Nurkic, throw in a Jeremy Grant if he sticks around, and that could be a very solid team that could be competing for a playoff spot even. Just skip over the whole play-in. Next up is Orlando, and that is another spot, much like Portland, where they have a lot of talent already on the roster. Paulo Banchero, last year's #1 pick. You have Franz Wagner, who I am a huge fan of in terms of his potential and just how he's been playing already in his career. Throwing guys like Markelle Fultz, Wendell Carter Jr., and Victor Wembanyama, throw him in at the 4, and that starting lineup of Fultz, Wagner, Banchero, WCJ, and Victor Wembanyama would be an absolute travesty for opposing teams to have to go up against every single night. Next up is the Indiana Pacers. This one's kind of similar to Charlotte, but I at least have way more hope in the Pacers building a competitive roster in the next year or two rather than the Charlotte Hornets. They already have Tyrese Halliburton and Miles Turner. That Wembanyama Turner front court would be something really fun to watch defensively. I'm gonna throw them in a cool. Their wing rotation is still pretty bottom of the league. Wembanyama would definitely help with that a little bit, even though he's more of a big than a wing. But yeah, for the most part, with guys like Benedict Mathurin, O'Shea Brissett, they have Buddy Hield still on the roster, Andrew Nembhard. There's a lot of pieces already there in place. I forget if I haven't mentioned Tyrese Halliburton yet, but he's obvious star point guard in the making. Would be a very fun partner to have with Victor Wembanyama. So yeah, I'm going to throw them in the cool because they still have a few moves to make if they do end up getting Wembanyama, but they'd have some good star power from the start. Next up is the Washington Wizards. They're one of the worst franchises in the league right now, to be honest. That Bradley Beal contract is a huge reason why I'm putting them in the U, because they have star players. You know, they have Beal, they have Kuzma, they have Porzingis. I know Kuzma might be on the move soon to be, but adding Wembanyama to this roster will definitely make them somewhat of a contender in the East. But overall, there are just many other places I would rather see Wemby go to because, again, Washington is just one of the worst franchises in the league at the moment. Next up is the Utah Jazz. I am going to throw them in the cool. I know they were kind of the Cinderella story of this most recent NBA season. A lot of them had Utah pegged to be one of the bottom teams in the league, and there they were fighting for a playoff spot right to the last week of the regular season. Now with that being said, they are still in rebuilding mode. Lauri Markkanen obviously had a huge breakout year. They have guys like Jordan Clarkson. THT started seeing some run in production by the end of the year. So throwing Wembanyama onto this roster, it'd be cool, but they still have a little bit of team building and a little ways to go before I would seriously consider them a contender. Obviously, Wemby would help accelerate that pace a little bit. But again, they're still kind of in rebuilding mode, much like the Spurs and the Pacers, who are in the same tier. Next up, we have Dallas, which this one's a little interesting because they should land in the top 10, but if they do end up being 11 through 14, then they lose that pick to the Knicks, and I forgot to include the Knicks on here, but anyway, Dallas, that'll be the first rigged one. Putting Luka and Wembanyama on the same roster sounds like something that should be illegal, and I know that the rest of the roster is absolutely putrid right now. There's a reason why the Mavs missed out on the postseason, despite having one of the best young players in the NBA. But regardless, I really hope that they wouldn't fuck up having Luka and Wemby on the same roster. I can see them doing it, but I also think that's something that'd be really hard to do. So again, if it happens, I doubt it will happen. It has a very low chance of happening. But if it happens, then yeah, the NBA might have rigged this stuff. And next we have Orlando again, who we've already talked about. But if this ends up being in the top 4, then it goes to Chicago, who I did include. And this is another E one, just because this Bulls front office has no idea what they're doing with this roster right now. I just saw some reports that they want to run things back and hope that Lonzo Ball can get healthy. Where, at this point in 2023, if you are banking your team's hopes on a healthy Lonzo Ball, I would kindly suggest maybe looking elsewhere. Now we're getting to the fun ones. Next up, we have OKC, who is going to slide very quickly into that rigged tier with the Dallas Mavericks. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is already a top player in the league. I mean, hell, he even got some MVP ballot votes at the end of the season. They have Josh Giddey, Jalen Williams, both of them, I didn't just say the same player twice. Chet Holmgren is yet to even play a single second in real NBA minutes for them, so, the front court of Wemby and Chet would be really fun to watch. And again, just SGA getting buckets, he can be their star player. Wemby can play off of him, not all the pressure will be on him to produce straight out of the jump. And yeah, just thinking about the chance that the Thunder pull this off. I mean, hell, they might even try to trade up to the #1 spot. Who knows? But they just have a plethora of draft picks and assets at their hands right now. And I would not be shocked if they try to make a big splash play, because if they add Wemby to this roster, then this is a very, very dangerous team on the rise. Next up, we have Toronto, who I'm going to put it in extremely fun, I guess. That didn't really sound very extremely fun to me, but I just, they have a lot of talent. They're definitely one of the better teams in the draft lottery with Siakam, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet. There's a bunch of other guys that I'm blanking on right now. But they did also just fire Nick Nurse. They seem to be at a crossroads of where exactly they want to go with their team, whether they want to keep on competing to try and get to the playoffs, or if they want to go into a rebuild mode. So that's what's kind of wanting me. You know what? I'm gonna put him in cool, because like Wemby just he I don't know. Going from Europe to Toronto feels like it'd be a very weird exchange. Not to be anti-Toronto. I don't know. This is the part where I mentioned the vibes coming in, and I just have some weird vibes about Wemby to Toronto for some reason. I don't know. It'd be cool. And last but not least, we have the New Orleans Pelicans, who will also be sliding right next to the OKC Thunder and the Dallas Mavericks in the rigged tier. Not only do the Pelicans have the worst odds at getting the #1 pick, which plays into this, but they also have some guys like, Zion Williamson, Brandon Ingram, Trey Murphy, a bunch of guys who are just really amazing at basketball at a really young age, and especially if they can just get over the health concerns, specifically with Zion, sort of specifically with Brandon Ingram. But yeah, if this ends up happening and there's even just a couple games where they have the big three of Zion, Ingram, and Wemby all on the court at the same time, I think all other 29 franchises are going to be praying to the basketball gods that something changes, because that would be an absolutely lethal trio. But anyway, here's the final board for those of you that want to see it. 14 teams with a chance. The Knicks aren't on there, but who really cares about the Knicks anyway? Draft lottery tonight. It's going to be fun to finally know where Wemby is going. A rare instance where on draft lottery night we will already know the first pick. But those are kind of fun too, because then we just get a lot of think pieces for the next couple of months over the summer. And yeah, that's all I gotta say on this one. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, all that good stuff. And at the very most, make sure that you have a good rest of your day. Thank you.